Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the show for analytically minded marketers. Let's get straight into today's show. For us to do our work, we often need buy-in from others. To articulate what we want done can sometimes be challenging. We use a lot of words to do it, and we may feel that it takes a long time and a long slide deck to explain what we're doing. But that's not really so. How condensed can we make our messages? Would you believe 160 characters or under 35 words? Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Well, I think we've got a couple of historical examples that would argue otherwise. Take the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. After a tremendously tragic battle was fought by the South and the North in the Civil War. He said, quote, "We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did there," unquote. Or take Emmeline Pankhurst, the English suffragette leader, where she explained why she and her peers were being rebellious. Quote, "We are here not because we are lawbreakers, we are here in our efforts to become lawmakers." Or you could go to Henry David Thoreau in New England, arguing that experiencing nature should be accessible to all, regardless of someone's social or their economic status. He said, quote, "The setting sun is reflected from the windows of the almshouse as brightly as from the rich man's abode." Coming into the modern era, we think of JFK, who said in 1961, quote, "The goal before this decade is out is of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth." In Canada, around that same time, a Minister of Justice named Pierre Trudeau, who was proposing that Canada should decriminalize homosexuality. What he said about that was, quote, "The view we take is there's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation." In 2008, Hillary Clinton was standing in front of the Democratic National Convention, where she lost out to Barack Obama for the nomination to run for president. And she said to her fellow women, quote, "We weren't able to shatter that highest, hardest glass ceiling this time, but it's got about 18 million cracks in it." I think after you've heard those, which were all under 35 words long, you'll agree with me that this is doable. Someone who believes that this kind of concise strategy is what it takes to lead people is also a believer that we must show them how to learn this skill so that they can craft their own strategies and develop into leaders themselves. And our guest is a storyteller, a framework maker, a brand builder who talks about these things and how to forge your own path. She's the CMO for a security technology firm called Field Effect. She's a wife and mom, and a 2024 recipient of Ottawa's Top 40 Under 40. Let's go talk now to Shea Cole. Let's go talk with Shea Cole. Shea Cole, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thanks, Glenn. Happy to be here.
I'm really glad you're here. You are going to help us do a better job of talking to people. I think it's important to kind of explain that the way in which marketers have to talk to people goes through a pretty severe change. That's at least been my experience. I'm used to, if I think back to junior days, I'd run programs and I'd review their performance and make changes and lather, rinse, repeat. And I remember I was, at some point asked to present to leadership and give them some explanation of our performance. And that made me kind of nervous, but I got to interact with them and, that nervousness went away. But when I would make a deck and just present it to them, I was often caught off guard by seeing them. Yeah, they would look at the numbers, but they would spend much more time asking about the program as a whole, as if they could just rip it up and replace it with something else. And I remember being perturbed by that because I'd thought, well, slide 2 and slide 3 and slide 4, I'm showing you the numbers, and are the numbers better than they were the previous time? Yay, good. When's lunch? And they would kind of obviously take a much more strategic view and mull over things. And I would, in those days, just find out later, oh yeah, no, there's a shift in direction. But as I moved through, these people started to let me share my own ideas of what our strategy is. And I'm going to tell you, I realized that making slides for that kind of a talk is totally different from making them the way I had done before, where I was just presenting numbers.
hmm
And it's these strategic kind of presentations, which you have been a really strong proponent for, and you have basically told us is the price of admission to the executive ranks.
Yeah.
So, can you help me understand what's so special about a presentation on strategy?
Yeah. So I realized fairly early in my career that every time something really good happened in terms of my career progression or feedback from bosses, promotions, top performer awards, it always followed a point in time where when I either got on stage or got up in front of a room of stakeholders and presented a strategy. And in the early days when I hadn't quite figured out what strategy meant, good things weren't happening after I presented. But after I
Okay.
figured that out, it
Yeah.
started to happen.
Yeah. I mean, no better proof than that.
hmm
So, but the mechanics of getting a presentation together, or uh, the way that we normally are used to doing it, is at least when we've been just doing the work, is we think about all the things that need to be done and we list them in a spreadsheet, or we fire up PowerPoint and drop them all in. All these things we could do. And I've been, in past showing that to people and saying, well, here's what we need to do. It's obvious. Let's just do these things and we will, you know, make blah bitty blah better.
hmm
And you say, no, 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 this is totally backwards. This is not at all how to formulate a strategy.
Right.
So, what was I missing? What mistake was being made there?
Yeah. So, what it all boils down to, Glenn, the easiest way to think about it is if you are just presenting either what you did or what you will do, you're not presenting a strategy because a strategy actually has to start with the why and the how before it comes to the what.
Mm,
Um, I like to tell my students because I do teach a class on strategy presentations. I like to tell them that strategy is just storytelling in a business context. And if you think about, reading an article or a book or watching the news, and you just hear someone say, a recounting of what someone did. So, for example, Katie woke up in the morning, she got out of bed, she put on her shoes, she walked to the bus stop, she kicked Tommy in the shins. That's not a story. It's just a recounting of what
yeah,
Katie did,
progression of, yeah, just
right?
a litany of events.
Layer
Yeah.
on how she felt when she woke up in the morning and why she kicked Tommy in the shins, all of a sudden you have a story.
Yes.
And that's how you have to think about your strategy presentations because a list of things that you're going to do is just a list of tactics. It's a plan, maybe, but it's not a strategy.
Hmm. And by the same token, if we're talking about analytics, a list of random data facts is not a insightful overview.
Yeah,
It's not driving us towards anything. It's just, here's all the stuff I found.
because there's no why,
Mm,
right? That's the thing that's missing. And finding an insight is actually a crucial step in building a strategy, in my opinion. And in order to do that well, you have to understand the difference between an insight and just an observation, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Tell me about the difference.
So, so good strategy is always rooted in data. And people love to say, oh, we have data, we have lots of insights. But the reality is that the insights are a step like that comes at the end of the process of analyzing your data. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to identify a business problem you have, and then you're going to look at your data to try to figure out, okay, what are some insights I can glean to try to figure out how I can solve this business problem. And step one is you're going to look for trends in that data. Once
Yeah.
you see a trend, it's really tempting to think, oh, I have an insight. But a trend is not an insight either. A trend is just an observation. What you need to do then is form a hypothesis about why. That's the really key point. Why is that trend happening? And then you need to look for a secondary source of data to confirm or disconfirm that hypothesis. And then once you have confirmation, oh, okay, so the data is trending in this way. And now I have confirmation of why that's happening. I have understanding. That's when you have an insight. And I have a really interesting story actually from my career about this.
Sure.
And it goes back to a time when I used to work in the beer industry. I actually worked for Labatt, and we had a little brand called Labatt 50. Was not a super big brand in our portfolio because we had some behemoths like Budweiser and Bud Light, but
Yeah.
Labatt 50, nonetheless, we wanted to sell it, and I was in charge of advertising. And the interesting thing about Labatt 50 was we would spend money on advertising, and we would draw a correlation between advertising and sales. And for every other beer in our portfolio, the more we spent on advertising, the more sales we got. And that's what you would
Right. Those two
expect.
lines move together.
Yeah, there was a correlation, except for Labatt 50. With Labatt 50, the more we spent on advertising, the less sales we got.
Hmm.
And so it was a strange one, and we didn't really understand why that was happening until we went in and gathered that secondary data, which was, we did some qual around it and asked actual Labatt 50 drinkers, and we found out that they viewed this beer as a quote unquote hipster beer. And
Right.
so the more we advertised it, the more mainstream it felt, the less attractive it was for them. And
Yeah.
so we completely changed our strategy. And instead of running TV ads, we started just focusing on those, the music festivals and the hipster bars where they were hanging out. But that's a great example of
Yes.
just seeing that negative correlation between spend and sales was not an insight, but then understanding that it was this perception problem, that was an insight.
For sure. And I'm going to make an observation about how you did these observations. And
Okay.
that is, I think if I look back, and I'm sure you do too, that it was times where you maybe went and did that qualitative looking and you felt it needed to be done. Might have been a little bit of extra time on your part, might have actually even meant some other regular routine parts of your job were getting
Hmm.
done a little bit more slowly, but you leaned into that thinking this could really give me an insight that helps me define the strategy. And, kind of a beg forgiveness versus ask permission kind of thing.
Hmm.
I have to note that I think it's that kind of little renegade that makes a person come up with something that they can show to the leadership. And the leadership will, after they have done that and come up with a new strategic direction, the leadership will be so thankful that they did it, even though if they'd asked at the forefront, the leadership might not have been like, well, why? I mean, don't you want to get your TPS reports in on time?
Hmm.
It's right. So I applaud and encourage people to also do that little bit of extra effort. That information's not going to be sitting somewhere. You got to turn a couple of stones over to find it. But
Yeah.
that's the thing that you must do if you want to knock their socks off with pointing out something that nobody else has come to them with before.
Yeah. I have to give Labatt credit for being a culture that really emphasizes insights and really that understanding of why, because it was hammered into my brain in those days that if I was going to report a slide full of numbers, I had to have a header on that slide that that clearly stated what the key takeaway was, right? So if I had a chart that was trending in some direction, I couldn't just put that chart on a slide and say, oh, you know, market share increased by X percent quarter over quarter. That was not acceptable. It had to
Right.
be, here's why we're seeing this.
Love it. Yeah. And um, uh, there could, I mean, you came up with the slide. I'm sure, and I can think of some of my own contemporaries who would have just kind of complained to me, oh, what a big mess this is. We're seeing declining market share. And that would be that. They would just complain and say management isn't doing their job by, finding out how we can get more customers about this. So it's about noticing that insight and then bringing it to people's attention. And you talk about a framework of as little as 6 slides that we can put this in. And insights are slide number 2, where we're going to present this stuff. But back us up for just a quick second
Yeah.
and tell me what the slide before that needs to be so that we can bring the group to a
Yeah.
place where they're ready to hear the insight.
Slide one is always the business problem or the objective.
Yeah.
Some people call it the job to be done. I find that you always have to remind people why they're in the room,
Yep.
because otherwise people start solutioning for things that are not really the task at hand. So
Mhm.
that's a best practice. You should always open with, today we are here to solve this problem, and put it on your slide.
Agreed. And it should even be, I think, and you talk about a bit of a pre-read, the time that the meeting is named, you should even, if you can, work some of that theme into. Do not give the meeting a name like, or put on the first slide a word like data review or meeting to talk about XYZ, right? Those are placeholder labels. They
Yep.
have no part in reminding people, oh, yeah, no, we actually have a goal. The people who started this organization wanted to pull off something great. Are we doing that? No. Well, where are we falling short? You need to hone in on that.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And this is how you're going to get people to pay attention, right? Because if they have as an objective the same objective as you're about to present on, then as soon as they see that on a slide or in a meeting agenda, they're going to make sure that they show up and that they pay attention.
There was a little column that they had. I think it was in Fast Company, and it was called Meetings I Never Miss. And right, that's part of it is the art of coming up with a title. But again, we waste so much time in meetings. There's needless time spent looking at stuff that could have just been a report. So if we're going to pull people together and we want to see action coming out of this, then I love how you say, let's not only have it at the beginning of the slide, but let's start as far back as we can, a couple of days, week or two before the meeting.
Hmm.
Let's get people into the corral on this. Let's get them all together. And I love how you said that, when their objective is the same as yours. I mean, yeah, that's what they're going to be attending to and thinking about, not other stuff, for as long as you have them in the room. So, and 6 slides is a short period of time. So let's jump into slide number 3 so that we can kind of take some of this good momentum and put it to work. What's
Sure.
slide number 3?
Yeah, so okay, so you had your objective slide, then you had your insight slide. We talked a little bit about how to find an insight. That's actually going to take you the most time on your prep work. Slide number 3 is your principles. Okay, so when we talked about business storytelling, if your objective and your insight are your why,
Yep.
your principles are your how. And the principles are super important to a strategy because the principles are how you get buy-in. If you present to someone a tactical plan and you haven't outlined some high level principles beforehand, the chances that they understand and remember it are slim.
Yeah.
People can't remember a volume of information that you throw at them without a precursor. So the principles, they are they're your guardrails, your guiding principles. And how you write them is really important because you need them to be memorable. So short and snappy. I never have more than 5 principles. I actually think the perfect number is 3, but
Okay.
anywhere from 3 to 5. And you want them to be so easy to remember that someone could see your principles slide once and then they could repeat that without ever seeing it again. So imagine a scenario: you're presenting your strategy, your boss is there, but your boss's boss is not there. That person just couldn't make it to the meeting. But then your
Okay.
boss gets up and leaves the room after your strategy presentation is done, and they bump into their boss. Let's say it's a CEO. They bump
Yep.
into the CEO in the hallway. The CEO is going to go, "Oh, was that Shay's presentation on blah, 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 blah?"
Yeah.
And your boss is going to go, "Yeah, it was great." CEO is going to say, "I wasn't able to attend. What was it all about? Give me the TLDR." And you want your boss to be able to say, "Oh, so it's a strategy on X, insert that business objective."
Yep.
And Shay pointed out that they're going to insert that high level insight. And then they're going to say, "And so the strategy is," and they're going to list those 3 principles. They're not going to say a darn thing about your tactical plan. They're just going to list it's the business problem, the insight, and the principles that you have created based on that insight. And that CEO is only going to care about that level of depth. As long as they're aligned with that approach, they're going to go, "Oh, okay, great." It works the same in terms of giving your idea legs throughout the organization. If people can sit in on your strategy presentation and understand and remember it easy enough that they can go and repeat it to other people in the organization, you will get more people bought in and you will improve your personal brand equity because now people are talking about your idea. No one
Yeah.
is going to go around and talk about your blocking chart or your tactical plan because it's just too much of a mouthful. But they'll talk about your principles.
I really like that. And we have obviously had to do a fair bit of pre-work before we got to the presentation.
Hmm.
But one of the things I really like about it, and I know from experience, I've got the scars to show it, that there can be, if you just blurt out what you yourself say is the solution, and you haven't done this first, you have left yourself open to people saying, "Oh, but what about this?" And, "Oh, well, you could have done it that way." And
Yep.
I think in the pre-work, yes, we should probably all whiteboard the myriad ways that we could solve a problem as we see it.
Right.
But if we notice those common principles that we are going to abide by, the things that the solution should or absolutely shouldn't contain, and we put those criteria in, that list gets whittled way down. We end up with maybe our one main solution. And if we take people along on kind of, well, here were the criteria that, we knew we had to follow to get there, and they nod, they're going to say when they see the final solution that it's the only way to go.
Hmm. Yeah. So the principles are also really important if you are working with a team, Glenn, right? For all the
Yeah.
reasons that you're saying. If I'm leading a team or I'm working together with people on something, I might not actually be the person who's going to create every tactical piece of the plan, right? We might
Yep.
whiteboard that out together. But
Yep.
as long as we're aligned on the insight and the principles, then we can all go our separate ways, create our tactical plans, and then bring them back and know that they're going to be aligned. I could delegate to people who are in other departments or people who work for me and say, hey, this is the insight, these are the principles. Can you create your portion of the plan?
Yeah.
And I'll know that it's going to be aligned.
Yes. Yeah. It will obviously be aligned, and it may even, I think, inspire them a bit.
Hmm.
Now, there's an example, and for everyone, Shea wrote up on Medium. If you happen to be a Medium member, you got to go check it out. A write up of this process she's explaining, and in it, she gives an example where a very turgid and verbose slide was put up for this main principles. And then she showed, okay, you'd never put that in front of the team, but you could instead show the team just 3 words that explain very crisply. And I don't recall the exact, details right now, but it was something like the Olympic motto. It was like faster, higher, stronger. And everybody, when they hear that, they instantly understand, oh, yeah, that's what the Olympics is for. And if I'm helping, let's say, mount a team that's going to represent our country at the Olympics, faster, higher, stronger. Like, this is what we have to do. And everybody gets on board. It takes milliseconds for people to resonate with that and to decide, okay, now we've got it. And as you say, the team can be very distributed, but people will still, months later, understand overall how the piece that they're doing is fitting into this overall strategy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It can be a sentence instead of a word, but it does
Yep.
have to be short and snappy. So if you are not a copywriter, use ChatGPT or
Right.
some other Gen AI and tell it, write your principle out in a regular sentence as if you were explaining it to someone, and then say, can you turn this into a tagline for me? Because a tagline is always going to be something people can remember.
Yep. Tell me, do you think that if we find ourselves in a situation where the company's values or maybe their vision statement has some tie in here, is it a good idea to l- lend from that and try to use that as a touchstone?
Um, I think it depends on what the business problem is that you're solving for.
Sure.
Um, you could put some assumptions out there, right? Around, um, okay, well, our insight is pointing us toward these principles, but our baseline assumptions are that we always do things this way, right?
Right. Yes. And the reason why I was thinking that was, and I'll liken it to like Hollywood movies here for a second. If you think about, the typical protagonist, there are things that you learn about just the way they act that are telegraphing their principles long before you ever get to the big ending scene and where they
Hmm.
have to actually solve a really tough problem. But you can kind of see the little glimmers of how they're going to solve it because you've already been told, okay, this is what they do, this is what they don't do. And I like how we might be able to tie some of those same things in. And yeah, case dependent, if it happens to be, well, that's just the way our culture is, or that's the way that our own values are written up, fine, all the better. But it's really going to depend on when you are putting it together and what you have.
Yep.
I do want to get into the next, back half of this, but before we do this, we're going to take a really short break. I'll step away to address one thing that's been missing from Funnel Reboot: the ability to access the text of any show. I'm glad to finally announce that the podcast is now fully searchable and copyable thanks to the transcript feature in YouTube. Yes, YouTube. Now, if shows are audio only, they are all on YouTube. Whether you're looking for a specific episode, a topic, or want to search the full text of a show for a specific part, go on to YouTube, head to Funnel Reboot's channel. Okay, now let's get back to the show. So Shea, we've got our first slide, which is the objective. We've got the second one, insights. We've got third, the principles we're going to follow. Take me to what the fourth slide contains.
So the fourth slide is a visual model. This is the only slide that would not be included if you were just having a conversation with someone to explain your strategy. Because if you didn't have slides, you can't show a visual model.
True.
However, you can send a strategy in the form of a memo and embed a visual model. I get that
Hmm.
question a lot. And the reason why I would do it, well, there's the official reason and then there's the unofficial reason. So the official reason is we know based on a multitude of research that when you draw something out, when you draw out your strategy, you understand it better yourself. It helps. It helps to work through a strategy in various different ways because we learn in different ways. And even if you are, maybe you're a visual learner, maybe you're a tactile learner, maybe you're an auditory learner, but there is still an advantage of drawing something out in various different ways in order to understand it better, number one. Number
Yep.
two is we also know that seeing something drawn out visually helps imprint a concept into long term memory. So, this is going to help your audience remember it better. And so, that visual model, it should be showing the relationships between your insight and your principles. Um, and, it could be as simple as it's literally taking your principles and putting them in a hierarchy. Maybe it's a flow chart. Maybe it's a 2 by 2.
Yep.
Maybe you've actually taken your data and made a graph and you're including that. Um, but yeah, so the official research says that it helps people remember it and it helps you understand it better as well as the strategist. But the unofficial reason why you want to include a visual model is because for some reason, and I've noticed this and I've talked to many friends who have noticed this, when you start including visuals in your strategy, people will just see you as strategic for some reason.
Hmm.
You could present the exact same presentation. And if you're just walking through bullet points and words on slides, or if you just send a memo that's written like an essay, and then you send the exact same document, but with a visual model, you will get the feedback that, oh my goodness, this was so strategic. You're such a great strategic thinker when you include the visual model, much more so than when you don't. Um, it's just a
Yeah.
universal truth.
Not gonna lie, that is a good reason to do it.
Yeah, hot
Um,
tip.
you mentioned a few kind of well-known diagram formats.
Hmm.
People should jump into whatever their presentation tool of choice is and look at the flywheels and the um, beginning to end process flows and stuff like that. There's all sorts, and you don't really come down hard one way or the other. There's no one right one. It's going to
Nope.
depend on what you have. But I agree with you. If you are the one who, I think it has something to do with if you have been able to describe the model and people haven't been able to form it as crisply as you have, then they'll adopt your model and they will absolutely remember and credit you as the author of how they started to think differently.
Yep. Yeah, that's
Big deal.
absolutely it. Yeah.
Um, the other thing I would notice, you showed an example in the Medium article of one where I think it had like different groups. It was, I think, a product going along, to reach product market fit or something like that. And um, it seemed to me that if I were one of the people sitting around the table in an org, that I would I couldn't stop myself from thinking, well, how do I fit into that model? And that's really wild because, you know, sometimes human beings have a lot of defenses,
Hmm.
but at that point, I noticed myself, my defenses dissolved, and I was asking, okay, so if I could, somehow plug into this, and my team could provide this thing, then we will help get this product to the point where it's perfectly, out into the marketplace. Um,
Yep.
there's your buy-in.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's just showing people that you're there to guide them as they think through the problem that you're solving in the room, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, a SWOT analysis is a visual model, even though it's
Right.
just words, but you've
Yep.
put it into those four boxes to separate it visually.
Yep. Yep. And big anchor, right? You've kind of even provided people now, you said SWAT, you've provided them with permission to use certain words to describe it.
Hmm.
And, that's when we kind of move into action. We can spend months or years inside of our own head. Lord knows I've tried to try and solve something, but it's not until it's spoken and written. And at that point, now it's taken form, and now there's actually something that can be done. And so I think that that's kind of huge to me. That is the uh, most pivotal slide in the deck, but we're not quite done. So we've got kind of heading downhill now. Next one is number 5. Which one's that, Shay?
That's the tactics. And so tactics and timing are step 5 and 6. And the secret here is that even though we're talking about how to present a strategy, tactics and timing are actually a plan. And so if you just present tactics and timing, you only have a plan. But if you present all 6 steps, you actually have a strategic plan because you've done both.
Hmm.
Now, if someone asks you to present a strategy, they are actually giving you permission to just present those first 4 steps,
Yeah.
but step 5 and 6 still have to exist. Otherwise, your strategy never turns into dollars,
Yeah. That's right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I was presenting my strategy to a group of people who needed to help me execute on it, then I would present the whole strategic plan. I would present 6 steps. If I was presenting my strategy to maybe our board of directors or our CEO, and I'm kind of catching the vibe that he doesn't have a ton of time, I'm only presenting steps 1 through 4, and then I'm going to tell him, if you'd like to see the tactical plan, then let me know. I can send it as a follow up. It's not as important as long as you have buy-in on the strategy, but all 6 steps need to exist in order to have that full strategic plan.
Good point.
Hmm.
Um, and again, I think for most of us, it's just fighting that urge to blurt those out and make those like the first, second, and third and fourth slides and never get to these other things. So you have intentionally held tactics. And to hear you say that it even could slip off of the very short verbal explanation you're giving, and that it could be sent later. And we should really hear that in terms
Hmm.
of how it works. This goes completely contrary to how I used to do it before. If I was doing, for example, a business case saying we need to do less of that and more of this, the sweat I would put into the numbers on the business case, and trying to make sure, well, is this a number that is like big enough to do it, but not so big that they'll say no? I would I would just labor over that, not realizing that if they didn't see why I should do that in the first place, they're not even going to worry about the size of the number.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing about tactics, especially in marketing, is that you have to have some flexibility to experiment. So if you spend all your time merchandising your tactical plan, then you're going to have to explain yourself when halfway through the campaign you actually change tactics, right?
Yeah.
Your principles shouldn't actually change, but if you're taking an approach where you're experimenting and you're doing little test and learns, your tactics actually might.
They could. People will, I think, also be helped by knowing roughly how long.
Hmm.
We're an impatient bunch, so if you can kind of even just let them know these will be the types of things that will indicate that we are near the end of seeing if this new direction works. These are the signposts we'll be looking for. I
Yeah.
don't think we need to be so prescriptive about, oh, it's going to be, 3 months, 1 week, and 2 days. But we can say instead, all right, here are the things that we know we're going to have step-in reviews, but we also know that if it's working, it should exhibit these traits. I think that's what people get comfortable with
Yep.
when they see, a timing. And let's face it, the bigger the initiative, the more complex and the more difficult it will be to name the timing. So I guess what I'm also saying there is it's okay to have realistic and sometimes fuzzy kind of timelines, but you have to show that you understand where we're driving this.
Yeah. And you have to know your audience too, right? If
True.
you're talking to leadership, they don't care, what day you're going to launch that webinar versus what day you're going to do this social media post. They only care, when can we expect the desired result to be achieved? So the timing piece, if you're talking to leadership, really just means timing of achieving the goal. Whereas if you're cascading a tactical plan to stakeholders who have to help you execute, that's when you have to get more into the nitty gritty of,
Right.
you have a blocking chart. You want to know, like, okay,
Yes.
how long is it going to take us to build the assets for this campaign? And based on that, here's when we have to, brief in an agency, and this is the day that we're going to launch, and yada, yada. So timing is kind of interpretive depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah. And you like to kind of end there. You say that we can have one or two optional things, maybe a bit of a conclusion, but actually you prefer to, keep it short and sweet, no long goodbye. You can say after that, I'll take questions, but you are very much in favor of letting the 6 slides that have just been presented sink in and speak for themselves, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm a big believer in making sure that meetings and presentations are succinct. I think that they're more powerful that way. We don't want any of this like death by PowerPoint where you have too much content in the meeting.
Yeah.
That's what the pre-read and the follow-ups are for. If you need to send more in-depth analysis that you've done, or extra details, then use a pre-read, use a follow-up, keep the meeting short and sweet, especially if you are presenting to leadership, because the chances that that person gets distracted or gets, an email that they can't ignore, or a phone call, or has to be, pulled away to another meeting, or shows up to the meeting late and you don't have
Hmm.
as much time as you thought you did. All of these things are highly likely if you're presenting to senior leadership. And so
Yeah.
you have to get your point across quickly. And please make sure that you get to that principles slide before you get to, like I like to say, get to it by the 25% mark in the meeting, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
if you have an hour-long meeting, you better be talking about principles by the time you get to that 15-minute mark,
Yeah.
because otherwise you're going to lose their attention are just too great, and the principles are the most important thing.
Well put. Shay, in your own journey to becoming now a CMO, you've had, time to hone your ability at this well enough that you can write, things like the Medium article and teach about how to do it. Am I right in guessing that getting good at this is somehow related to the fact that you've been tapped for things like management roles?
Um, yeah, I really think so. Like I said when we started chatting, every time that I've seen a leap in progress in my career, or I can feel an increase in my personal brand equity, it always follows a moment when I got on stage and I talked about strategy. And I do truly believe that there's a lot of brilliant marketers who plateau a bit in their career because they get stuck in the world of tactics. And while you need to be tactical and you need to understand how to execute, at a leadership level, people need to see that you can be strategic. And so if you don't figure that out, you will be stuck in execution roles for your entire career. Maybe that's what you want, but if you want to be a leader, and there's lots of research to back this up, you have to show that you're strategic. And this is a really great way to do it.
For sure. Yeah. And there's a place for individual contributors. But if we're looking to be the one who grooms a team, who, as you say, increases the scale of the strategy by being able to have a wider group of people that are executing it. Yeah, this is the way to go. And this is a crucial skill on the way to getting there.
Yeah.
Shea, if people want to find either the article or the other things that you do, where you post, where would you send them?
I would send them to LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn a lot. If you go to my profile, I also have the Medium article there, and it's a link that you should be able to access even if you're not a paid Medium member. I also do, like I said, I teach this as a course through electives if your company is an electives member, but also I'll do it ad hoc. So if someone is interested in bringing me in to present this as a keynote or a course to their team, or if there's someone who could use a little bit of one-on-one coaching on this process, then send me a message on LinkedIn and I can walk you through exactly what I could do for you.
Thanks again for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you for having me, Glenn. This was fun.
To those who've listened to the end, if you haven't taken notes, you can just go to the show notes page. I'll have it there. You have no doubt come away with stuff that gives you more insight into how you do your marketing so you can do it better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @FunnelReboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.